In Peaky Blinders, Billy Kimber enters the confrontation with Tommy Shelby as a racecourse boss about to lose his throne. Cigarette smoke, razor blades, dark suits, wet Birmingham streets. And a single gunshot turned Kimber into the first major death in the Shelby legend. But outside the real history, Kimber's trail leads to King's Cross, London. In 1921, the Racecourse War was heating up. From Birmingham, Kimber brought his men down south, where racecourses were not only places to watch horses run, but places where bookmakers held cash, punters placed bets, and gangs fought over every profitable position. At Greenford Park Trotting Track, Kimber's men were said to have ambushed Darby Sabini. That blow was not aimed at one man alone. It struck directly at the network of a family already powerful in London's betting world. After tensions with the Sabini side, Kimber appeared at King's Cross. He was beaten. Shots were fired. A racecourse boss from Birmingham was found wounded by gunfire in the middle of London. On screen, Billy Kimber is finished by Tommy Shelby in a clean, dramatic scene. The real history was far messier. An ambush at a racecourse, a meeting at King's Cross, and the shadow of the Sabini gang behind the fight for betting money. So what force had Billy Kimber crossed? And why were the Sabinis the real history hidden behind the Peaky Blinders legend? Today, join Crime Britain archives as we step away from the Tommy Shelby legend and enter the real world of the racecourse wars, where an ambush in Greenford, a meeting at King's Cross, and the name Sabini reveal a darker, lesser-known side of Britain's underworld. In Peaky Blinders, viewers see a Birmingham filled with cigarette smoke, factories, dark pubs, men in suits walking through the streets with razor blades hidden in their caps, and confrontations with racecourse bosses such as Billy Kimber and the Sabini family. But the real history does not fit neatly into one timeline like that. The name Peaky Blinders was originally linked to street gangs in Birmingham in the late 19th century. It was a world of poor young men fighting in the streets, causing disorder, petty theft, territorial disputes, and reputations built through street violence. Billy Kimber, Alfie Solomons, and the Sabini gang belonged to a different period, the years between the two world wars, when the real money was not only in street fighting but in racecourses, betting, gambling, and protection. The series brought those different worlds closer together to create a more dramatic story. Tommy Shelby is a fictional character, but names such as Kimber, Sabini, and Solomons came from real history, so if people only watch the drama, they can easily think this war was a story of honor, guns, and stylish revenge. In real life, it was far colder than that. It was a fight for control of the money around the racecourses, where every bet, every collection point, and every crowd could become a source of profit for gangs. On race days, Britain's racecourses were not only places of entertainment, they were living streams of money. From the morning, crowds gathered around the entrances. Racegoers pushed through the barriers. Bookmakers stood close to the betting ring. They wrote odds quickly, took cash, paid out winnings, kept records of debts, and always had to watch who was standing near their pitch. There, the money was not in a bank. It was in coat pockets, cash boxes, the hands of betting collectors, and debts promised after the next race. A single horse crossing the line could make one man win heavily, another lose everything, and a bookmaker become a target. That was where gangs such as the Sabinis came in. They did not need to control the whole city. They only needed to control the points where the money was. The bookmakers' pitches, the entrances and exits, the betting ring, the collectors, the men protecting the stalls, and the debtors around the racecourse. A warning in the betting ring could force a bookmaker to pay protection money. A fight behind the rails could make a rival give up his position. A group of men appearing at the right moment could remind the whole area who was in charge. So the racecourse wars were a fight for control of cash. And in that world, the Sabini name became a real source of fear. When the British press wrote about the Sabini gang in the 1920s, they often used dramatic labels: the Italian gang, the Sabini gang, or descriptions that made readers imagine a group of outsiders arriving from some distant world. But their family history was far more complicated than that. The Sabini family had lived in Clerkenwell, the area often called London's Little Italy, from at least the 1890s. This was not unfamiliar territory to them. It was where they grew up, worked, moved around, knew their neighbors, knew the narrow streets, the crowded houses, and the corners of the Italian immigrant community in central London. In late 19th century census records, the Sabini name appears at addresses such as Warner Street, Back Hill, and Summer Street. Those streets were close to one another, forming a tight cluster of family and community. Some Sabini households lived with several other families at the same address. Some family members were born in Italy, others were born in London. Some children carried English names, Italian names, or variations that later made the records harder to follow. By 1901, Sabini families were still in Clerkenwell, in places such as Mount Pleasant and Gove Street. One man in the family was recorded as working as a horse driver. By 1911, the family appeared again in Bowling Green Lane, with work connected to coal dealing from the home. Those details matter. They show that the Sabinis cannot be understood simply as an outside criminal group. They were the product of a poor, crowded, immigrant area of London, shaped by small trades, family networks, and overlapping community ties. It was from that environment that men such as Darby Sabini grew up. When they moved into the world of racecourses, betting, and protection, the press saw a frightening Italian gang, but behind that label was a family that had been rooted in Clerkenwell for decades. The Sabinis did not stand outside London, they were made by London itself. The strange thing about Charles Darby Sabini is that even when looking at the historical record, it is not easy to know exactly what name to call him by, in the press and in many accounts of the underworld. He is usually known as Charles Darby Sabini, but in other records that name changes. At times he is recorded as Octavius Sabini, at other times as Ottavio Sabini. Sometimes he appears under the nickname Darby. Other documents mention names such as Frank Handley or Frederick Handley. This confusion is not a small detail. It makes Darby Sabini difficult to pin down from the very first layer of history. His name. When he was questioned after an incident at the Fratellanza nightclub in 1922, he was recorded as telling police that he had used the names Frank Handley and Ottavio Sabini, but that his name was not Charles Sabini. Years later, in 1940, when Home Office records considered his wartime detention, he again appeared with a series of different names and aliases. Part of this confusion may have come from the mixing of Italian names, anglicized names, and names connected to his mother's family, but for a man living in the world of betting, protection, and racecourses, having several names could also become a layer of protective fog. Darby Sabini was therefore not only a boss in the racecourse wars, he was also a puzzle in the archives. The press needed a name to turn him into a symbol of the Italian gang. The police needed a name to put into their files, but history left behind a man who does not remain completely still under any single name. And that is part of what made Darby Sabini more dangerous in the public imagination. A boss who was real, yet blurred, and who was turned by the press into a legend in the 1920s. When the Sabini name appeared in the newspapers, they were not described only as a criminal group fighting for money at the racecourses. Reports often attached them to phrases such as Italian gang or Sabini gang, immediately leading readers to imagine an outside force, mysterious and more dangerous than ordinary London gangs. Simply by emphasizing their Italian background, the story changed color. A fight around a racecourse was no longer just a dispute over a bookmaker's position. A clash between groups in Little Italy was no longer only a territorial conflict, it was told as a family feud, full of honor, revenge, hot blood, and inherited violence. At the Old Bailey, during the trial involving the Cortesis group, rivals of the Sabini brothers, Judge Darling even compared the case to Italian feuds, referring to the Montagues and the Capulets. That image was powerful. It made the public see not only a racecourse gang, but a story that seemed like a family tragedy brought out of history. But beneath that dramatic language, the real motive was far colder and more practical. It was betting money. It was positions at the racecourse. It was control over bookmakers. It was protection. It was men using fear to keep money flowing towards them. The Sabinis were genuinely violent, but the media of the time turned them into a symbol more frightening than reality itself. The Sabini gang's war began at the racecourses, where betting money passed through the hands of bookmakers, collectors, lenders, and protection men standing among the crowds. Every position in the betting ring had value. A bookmaker in the right place could make a great deal of money on a race day. A group of men feared enough could protect a betting pitch, force rivals to leave, or turn protection money into an unwritten law. That was the world Billy Kimber wanted to enter. From Birmingham, Kimber pushed his influence down towards the southern racecourses, where London groups already had their own networks. To the Sabinis, this was not only competition, it was an intrusion into their money. In 1921, the tension erupted. Kimber's men were said to have ambushed Darby Sabini at Greenford Park trotting track. But the conflict did not stop at the racecourse. Only days later, Kimber was found in King's Cross, London, beaten and shot after he was said to have gone to meet Sabini. That detail shows that the racecourse wars had moved beyond betting. They had become a feud between bosses who wanted control of the same stream of money. From the betting pitches to the streets of London, violence followed the cash, and in that war, the Sabini name gradually became one that rivals could not ignore. Peaky Blinders is compelling because it is not completely detached from history. The series borrows names, gangs, and conflicts that once existed in Britain's underworld, then pushes them into a darker, harsher, and more cinematic story. On screen, Billy Kimber dies at the hands of Tommy Shelby. In real life, he did not meet that end. Kimber lived for many more years and died in a nursing home in Torquay. Alfie Solomons is also turned into a colorful character, but his historical traces fade by the early 1930s. The Sabinis, meanwhile, are turned into cold antagonists opposing the Shelby family. The reality was more complicated. They were a family rooted in Clerkenwell, rising through racecourses, betting, and protection. The series creates a legend. History leaves behind a colder story. The real story of the Sabini gang does not need a Tommy Shelby, a stylish gunfight, or a staged death in the street to become frightening. Their power lay in things far colder. A family rooted in Little Italy, a network of contacts in Clerkenwell, money-making positions around the racecourses, bookmakers who needed protection, debts that had to be paid, threats small enough not to become legend, but strong enough to make people move out of the way. On screen, the Sabinis became villains. In real life, they were part of an underworld that knew how to attach itself to the places where cash flowed most heavily, and when the newspapers of the time called them the Italian gang. The Sabini name moved beyond the racecourses and became a symbol of fear in the London underworld.